I want to begin with something most people in my position are trained never to say out loud. For a very long time, I was one of the people who benefited from the order that is now falling apart. I moved comfortably inside a world built by educated, credentialed, highly verbal people who prized the very traits they themselves possessed. They admired fluency, abstraction, test-taking ability, institutional confidence, and cultural polish. They built schools, newsrooms, foundations, universities, and prestige professions around those traits. Then they told the country that what they had built was not a class system, it was meritocracy. That was the elegant lie. It sounded fair. It sounded democratic. It sounded modern. It sounded as if the gates were open, and the only question was who had the talent and discipline to walk through them. But once you looked closely, you saw something else. The people who wrote the rules had written them in their own image. They had taken their own advantages and rebranded them as universal standards of worth. They had confused the qualities that help a person rise in elite institutions with the qualities that make a human being admirable, reliable, or wise. That confusion did immense damage. By the time a child from an affluent household reaches adolescence, he is often years ahead of a child from a less privileged background, not because he has been proven more virtuous, but because he has been raised inside a machine designed to feed him advantage. He has better schools, better neighborhoods, more adult attention, more stable routines, more vocabulary, more invisible coaching, more knowledge of how to behave around powerful people, and more confidence in environments that make other children feel immediately out of place. Then, when the sorting process is complete, the winners look down from the top of the structure and call it justice. That is not justice. That is self-replication disguised as fairness. And when a ruling class does that for long enough, it does not merely generate inequality. It generates humiliation. It creates a country where one class is taught to believe it deserves to lead. And another class is taught quietly but relentlessly that its struggles reflect some personal deficiency. The language may remain egalitarian, but the emotional structure becomes caste. Like, you can see the consequences everywhere once you stop pretending the problem is only economic. The people outside the prestige system do not merely have smaller paychecks. They live with weaker institutions, thinner friendships, more family instability, more isolation, and less hope that the society respects them. Their lives become more fragile in ways the elite often do not even notice because the elite can buy buffers against fragility. And now it was only the first thing the educated class did wrong. The second thing was worse. The first injury was social. The second was spiritual. A healthy civilization needs more than prosperity. It needs some shared moral structure. It needs a common understanding that certain things are right even when they are costly, and certain things are wrong even when they are convenient. It needs citizens who believe that truth is not merely a personal mood and morality is not merely a private lifestyle choice. Without some moral order, freedom becomes directionless and society becomes emotionally exhausted. But the educated elite, especially in the modern West, did something fatal. It took morality out of the common square and shoved it into the private apartment of the self. It taught people to find their own truth, choose their own values, build their own identities, and decide for themselves what the good life should mean. That was presented as liberation. In many ways, it was disintegration. Because once every person becomes his shared life grows thinner, trust weakens, duty weakens, reverence weakens, people become less certain about why they owe anything to anyone beyond preference, feeling, or temporary agreement. The society becomes materially advanced and inwardly lost. That is one reason so many people now live in a country that is richer than the one their grandparents knew, but also sadder. You can feel it in the air, more loneliness, more despair, more anxiety, more people who have vocabulary for self-expression, but very little language for self-common, sacrifice, or obligation. We told citizens they were radically free and then acted surprised when they felt spiritually homeless. A person cannot build a durable life on appetite alone. A nation cannot build a durable civilization on private truths. And once the shared moral frame starts collapsing, politics becomes something darker. It becomes a battle of emotional intensities between groups that no longer recognize a common standard above themselves. That brings me to the third thing the educated elite produced. It produced a reaction. A lot of people speak as if the rise of angry anti-institutional politics came from nowhere, as if it were some random virus that entered an otherwise healthy body. I do not believe that. I believe it came from the body itself. When a society is run for decades by people who monopolize prestige, rig opportunity, talk down to ordinary citizens, and hollow out the moral foundations of common life, a backlash is not surprising. It is inevitable. What surprised me was the form that backlash took. It did not produce, at least not at the top, a genuinely constructive populist class. It produced another elite, but an elite with a different style, less polished, more theatrical, more openly contemptuous, but elite all the same. Highly educated people, highly ambitious people, institutionally credentialed people who learned that the fastest way to power in a disillusioned country was to position themselves as enemies of the institutions they themselves once knew how to exploit. That is why I have never been persuaded that this new politics is a true restoration of conservatism or a serious moral renewal. Real conservatism is institutional. It understands that fragile things need care. It knows that a country is not built in a year and can be badly damaged in one reckless season. It values continuity, restraint, character, and the slow accumulated wisdom embedded in law, custom, family, faith, and civic life. What we have now is something far more reckless. It is anti-institutional without being truly reformist. It is disruptive without being constructive. It is moralistic in language while being corrosive in behavior. It flatters grievance but cannot govern the wounds it opens. And so the country has found itself trapped between two deformed elites. The first elite rigged a ladder and called that fairness. The second elite climbed on top of the resentment created by that rigged ladder and called destruction strength. That is the moment we are living in, and I do not think it can be understood unless we recognize that the crisis is three crises at once. It is a social crisis because inequality was built into the structure of opportunity. It is a moral crisis because we privatized truth and dissolved the shared ethical order that once held a diverse society together. It is an institutional crisis because the public, having lost trust in the old gatekeepers, has become vulnerable to people who despise stewardship and mistake demolition for courage. The temptation in a moment like this is either panic or nostalgia. Panic says everything is collapsing and nothing can be recovered. Nostalgia says we simply need to go back. I am skeptical of both reactions. History usually works through rupture and repair. A society drifts. Its ruling assumptions become stale. Unjust, arrogant, or spiritually empty pressure builds. The structure breaks, and then the people inside that rupture face a decision. They can become harder, more bitter, more fragmented, and more cynical, or they can become deeper. They can allow suffering to reveal what comfort concealed. I have often thought that individuals and nations are not as different as we pretend. A person who goes through failure, grief, or disillusionment sometimes discovers something essential that success had been hiding from him. He sees his vanity, he sees his shallowness, he sees what really matters. The same can happen to a country. Crisis can be a form of revelation if the people inside it are willing to be humbled by it. That is what I think is available to us now, if we are honest enough to accept it. But the recovery will not begin where television tells you to look. It will not begin with a single election. It will not begin with one charismatic figure promising to save the nation by himself. It will not begin through anger alone. Anger can expose corruption. It cannot build character. It cannot teach duty. It cannot create trust. It cannot restore moral depth. Real cultural repair starts somewhere quieter and much harder. It starts when enough people recover a better answer to the question, how should I live? For too long, the answer has been some variation of this. Assert yourself, express yourself, optimize yourself, promote yourself, curate yourself, defend yourself. That is the creed of hyper-individualism, and it has left millions of people lonely, brittle, and hungry for belonging. The healthier answer is more demanding, live in service, live in duty, live in covenant, live in relationship. Live in such a way that your gifts are not simply instruments of your own ascent, but obligations toward other people. A free society cannot survive if everybody is trained to ask first, how do I build me? And almost nobody is trained to ask, what do I owe? That is why moral formation matters more than policy people often admit. You cannot create a civilization so perfectly engineered that the people inside it no longer need virtue. In fact, the more freedom a society has, the more it depends on character. If the citizens become vain, impulsive, cruel, and self-absorbed, the structures above them will not save them. We also need civic repair, not only gigantic institutions with national branding, but local associations, schools, congregations, mentoring structures, neighborhoods, clubs, service organizations, and all the intermediate layers that teach human beings how to belong to one another. The strongest societies are not held together by government alone. They are held together by dense webs of relationship and moral memory. And finally, we need a better way of seeing one another. One of the great temptations of every elite, old or new, is to turn other people into categories: voters, consumers, identity groups, winners, losers, deplorables, enemies, assets, problems. But any society that trains its citizens to see each other that way will become cruel, no matter how advanced its technology or polished its rhetoric. The deeper answer is what I would call defiant humanism. By that, I mean the stubborn insistence, even in a brutal age, that every person you meet could, under other circumstances, have been you. That the stranger carries a life as real as yours, that the broken person, the angry person, the arrogant person, the frightened person, the person who disgusts you or disappoints you, still belongs to the same human family and still must be seen in full moral seriousness. That does not mean indulging evil. It means refusing arrogance. And arrogance, more than anything, is what brought us here. The old elite was arrogant enough to think its own advantages were proof of virtue. The new elite is arrogant enough to think its own aggression is proof of authenticity. Both are wrong. If this country is going to come back, it will not come back through a more sophisticated version of elite self-worship. It will come back through the rebuilding of the social fabric, the moral fabric, and the institutional fabric together, not separately, together. Because what broke was not only our economy, what broke was not only our politics, what broke was our way of living with one another. And that is why the task ahead is bigger than replacing one ruling class with another. The task is to become a better people than the system has lately been training us to be.